We're very lucky to be joined on the program today by a candidate running in the Democratic primary for the congressional race for Texas's 35th district. Greg Casar, welcome to the Damage Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're happy to have you on. We feel like on the show we're really focusing on the Austin area recently. We were just talking with a candidate in the 37th district. So your area has recently experienced, both growth. Texas is receiving additional congressional seats. It's actually resulting in the current representative of your district, Lloyd Doggett, being moved to a different district. So tell me a little bit about the decision to run and how some of what's been going on in Texas recently might have informed that decision.
Yeah, Texas grew and we gained a couple more congressional districts, but honestly, it may have been we might have gotten another one if they had really properly tried to count everyone here. But we know that there has been a continued move to undercount immigrant communities, especially Latinos in Texas. And then the districts continue to be drawn to really consolidate incumbent power. And in Texas, that means right wing and corporate power. And so this district runs along the highway across 4 counties. But in so many ways, it links working class communities from East Austin down into downtown San Antonio, communities that were ravaged by a winter storm, where fossil fuel interests just continued to privatize our electric grid that resulted in so many people's deaths. Communities that have been stripped of reproductive rights in Texas under new laws and whose voting rights and worker rights continue to be trampled upon. And so even though the maps are drawn with the worst logic underlying all of them, at the end of the day, this district really connects those working class communities of color that need and deserve a leader that is gonna fight against the horrible laws that we see governing folks here in Texas.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And your overall point about their willingness to undercount, like I understand pragmatically, politically at the national level, that helps Republicans in some way, but it obviously hurts Texas specifically in terms of federal dollars you could be receiving, electoral power. I mean, if they expect that they're gonna win Texas's future presidential elections, that's an extra electoral college vote that could potentially be going to them. But this is the sort of irrational results you can get when you base your politics on racism. In any event, let's talk a little bit about you. Prior to this run, I know that you've served in the city council in Austin. Tell me a little bit about your experience prior to launching this bid.
Well, before I was ever an elected official, I didn't plan on doing this. I was a community organizer working alongside our lowest wage workers that are custodians and construction workers, standing up against some of the highest grossing companies in the state, demanding that workers be paid a decent wage, demanding and working when I was in college, organizing alongside workers, asking for the right to a water break on construction sites. Oftentimes in Texas, we have many over 100-degree days and it feels even hotter up on a scaffold. And I was working with families to organize vigils for fallen family members who had died when they weren't given a water break at work. And we saw that even our city council, that was all Democrats at the time, still struggled and we still had to push so hard to win those basic rights. So I decided to run for city council myself and bring alongside me that workers' rights movement. And we were able to double the minimum wage for thousands of workers in our city from $7.25 to $15 an hour.
Wow.
We wrote a paid sick days law because no paid sick days laws existed anywhere in the South and passed it here in Austin, but then actually coordinated with the movement in San Antonio to pass it there too. And so we've been working alongside activists throughout this I-35 corridor to really try to build that progressive power. And that's the work I've been doing for years. But that paid sick days law is one example of something that was undone by our Republican state government in the middle of the pandemic. And that can only be overridden by Congress, a Congress that really should provide paid sick time and a $15 an hour minimum wage and voting rights and frankly paid parental leave to every single Texan and every single American, no matter what it is that really just crass politicians like Governor Abbott. No matter what they're up to, we need that sort of federal support to be able to guarantee people those basic rights.
Yeah, I agree. And it's an open question as to, let's say that you win the Democratic primary, you win the general election. Will the Democrats still even be in power after that point? We know it's probably going to be a difficult race. There tends to be apathy in midterm elections for the party that won the presidency in the previous election. So a lot of it's going to come down to what the election ends up being about. What's the context? Some of that you can't do anything about, what happens. But in terms of what issues you'd like to center your eventual race for, let's say that you move past the primary, you're running in the general election. What are some of the issues that you'd make central to your candidacy?
Right before I get to that point, you mentioned earlier about losing control of Democrats not having control. And one of the things we really need to do is to fight on those issues that excite everyday voters and show not only our talking points, but that we can deliver on those talking points so that people show up and vote and keep the Republicans from essentially taking back over the House. But another thing I want to mention is that we've seen the power of freshman Democrats who stand up for their values and what they can do at the national scale. And that's part of what's inspired me. When Representative Cori Bush in her first term went and sat and slept on the steps of the Capitol when the eviction moratorium lapsed, she didn't need control of Congress. She didn't have to negotiate with Mitch McConnell or with Joe Manchin. She led a movement with her voice that created the opportunity for the president to extend the eviction moratorium and save thousands of people's homes. And that's what I'm going out there and talking to folks about, is keeping folks in their house, raising wages, bringing back reproductive rights to Texas that have been banned by so many people, and having a functional electric grid. People are worried that in Texas, there might be a storm and we could just not have water or heat again for days. Because we've seen the governor taking $1 million contributions from the natural gas industry right after he writes a loophole for them to not have to protect their supplies for future storms. And so people want those basic things delivered. And I think that we can fight and win for those as Democrats. And I think that individual members of Congress can actually use their platform in such bigger and greater ways to achieve change just in their own districts or really across the country if we're willing to stand up and fight for what we believe in and really deliver for the people that sent us there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the example you gave of Cori Bush was a great example of how that can be done, even from someone who's very new to Congress. So let me ask you a sort of hypothetical question that I like to ask. Let's imagine that right now, rather than being a candidate running in this race, you're in Congress representing the 35th district this week. With all that's going on right now, obviously it's the anniversary of January 6th. Legislative action on most of the Biden administration's priorities seems to have ground somewhat to a halt. They don't seem to be making much progress on the infrastructure reconciliation bill or on the voting rights bill. How would you be spending this week if you were not candidate Greg, you were Congressman Greg this week?
I think that we need a strategy organizing across the country to push swing votes, to get rid of the filibuster. We need to be linking arm in arm across the country, making those demands. And that's not something that I know I can do myself, but it's something with an organizing background that I know I can play a role in, where we should really be taking a look at the fact that the filibuster, overwhelmingly, the majority of votes blocked by the filibuster under a recent analysis were civil rights laws. That's something that we should all be talking about, that we should all be marching arm in arm about. When in my state, the governor passed this racist show me your papers law that was really about separating families and turning our police officers into deportation officers. I led, alongside faith leaders, a sit-in in the governor's office that really galvanized support for a statewide lawsuit that then blocked key portions of that law. And I think it's that kind of work that we need to be doing. I also believe that we need to be generating higher voter turnout in districts like 35 that are heavily Democratic, but vote so much less. Because if we're actually not just knocking on doors for a re-election, but actually to shape American politics, that's what gets rid of somebody like Senator Ted Cruz, is when people in a district like 35 that is heavily our historically Black neighborhoods, majority Latino, progressive, stops turning out at lower rates, and we really invest the resources to get those folks energized for the long term. This isn't something that we fix in just 1 year, but it's something that we have to start working on today.
Yeah, I agree. And some of those statewide races in Texas have been so tight recently. Like, imagine how significant it could have been if Ted Cruz had been booted out of the Senate the last time around. So I agree with you there. One more question. So the current representative has been sort of redistricted into, he's going to be running in another district. So you have multiple candidates who are running in your district. Has there been any sign that the Democratic Party, especially considering that this is a pretty blue seat and the winner of the primary is a very good chance of getting to Congress, Has there been any sign of the Democratic Party getting involved in this primary yet? Have they reached out to your campaign?
Yeah, we have built such a broad coalition that includes sort of the whole swath of the party, right? I was, I've been heavily involved as a council member bringing people together. And so we just announced the endorsement of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is nearly 100 members.
That's awesome.
Progressive members of Congress, and have the endorsement of folks like Jamal Bowman and Representative Sylvia Garcia here in Texas. But we also have Sunrise, the Sunrise movement here, both in Austin and in San Antonio. Every single labor union that's made an endorsement has made an endorsement for our campaign so far. So we're really trying to build that broad breadth of support to make it so that we're talking about how progressives are the folks that are trying to really deliver that change. And that's what we want to show, is that we can bring together different parts of the progressive movement and send the Democratic Party in that direction.
Awesome. Those are very good endorsements to have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We've been working hard.
Yeah. No.
The most important endorsement is every time we knock a door, getting somebody involved in the race. And so we've got to be able to convert the headlines into, real voters getting to the door.
Okay, well, let's talk about that now. Let's say that there's a viewer possibly in the area that like to get involved in your campaign. How can they do that?
You can check out my social media accounts. It's just at Greg Casar, or you can go to casarforcongress.com, ask for a yard sign, make a small donation if you can. The majority of our donors have all been folks giving under $36. And so you chipping in a little bit helps us out a lot in Texas. You can sign up to volunteer. We have in-person events. We'll start having remote volunteer events soon. And so please do get involved and spread the word about the campaign.
Awesome. Greg Casar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all so very much. Take care.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.